So there I was, 6 years old, at the single most dangerous dinner party in the 7th century, and I was about to rob the strongest man alive of his chicken. Let me back up. 1 minute I'm working overtime, dead on my feet, staring at a spreadsheet. Next minute the sun is trying to personally murder me through a lattice window. My legs don't reach the floor, and a room full of men in purple robes are toasting each other like I've wandered onto the set of a period drama with a very generous catering budget. Then the memories crashed in, all of them, at once, like someone poured an entire library into my skull through a funnel. I was Zhao Wei, age 6, the eldest grandson of the emperor of the Tang dynasty. Cool, very cool. Love that for me. Except, and here's the part where the record scratches, I also knew exactly who my father was. Crown Prince Zhao Long. And I knew exactly what Crown Prince Zhao Long was going to do about 11 months from now. He was going to launch a rebellion, a spectacularly stupid one. It would fail, he'd get demoted to commoner and exiled, and he'd be dead inside 2 years. And me? The doting little grandson who came bundled with that package. History doesn't spend a lot of ink on what happens to the sons of failed rebels, but the ink it does spend is never the fun kind. So let me summarize my situation. I finally transmigrated into a royal body. Jackpot, right? And the fine print says I have roughly 1 year to live before my idiot father gets us both erased. I hadn't even eaten a single grape of the royal buffet yet. The universe said, lol, transmigrated, but there's a catch, buddy. And then, right as I was spiraling, a bell went off inside my head. Not a real bell, the other kind. Ding. Old Wang's treasure chest system is now active. Host binding successful. Here's the deal. It is the dumbest, most perfect deal I have ever been handed. I bind to one person. Then, whenever I make that person feel something hard, shock, joy, rage, doesn't matter, they drop a treasure chest. Bigger the spike, better the loot. The system scanned the room and found my optimal target 20 feet away, on the dragon throne. Black hair going silver. Dragon robe. The bearing of a man who conquered a continent before he turned 30. Tang Ziyuan. Emperor Taizong. The strongest carbon-based life form of the age, personally responsible for more corpses than the plague. Bind account? The system asked. I have never clicked yes so fast in my life. Because think about it, my death sentence is signed by my father. My survival, it turns out, is a slot machine, and the jackpot lever is the mood of the one man in the world powerful enough to tear that death sentence up. All I had to do was make Pops feel things. Buddy, I can make people feel things. The opportunity walked right in the door. A guard hauled in a giant stone urn, some Western region's delicacy, stone jar chicken, a birthday gift from a fat, fox-faced old duke named Chen Haoyuan. The emperor, generous host that he was, ordered it shared out among the princes and ministers. A few sad pieces landed on my plate. A whole leg landed on his. Now, my uncles, a table full of grown princes, were falling over themselves being filial. My fat uncle Zhao Min, the Prince of Wei, did this whole simpering routine about how he couldn't possibly taste the chicken before father. Everybody nodded. So filial, so sweet. I picked up my plate and walked over to the emperor of the Tang dynasty. The whole hall froze. You could feel it. My dad hissed at me to come back. Fat Uncle Zhao Min narrowed his little bean eyes. The Fox Duke Chen Haoyuan stroked his beard, waiting to see what the tiny gremlin was doing. And I stood in front of the man who governed Asia, grinned up at him, held out a piece of my chicken, and said in my cutest little voice, "Pops, do you want some chicken?" His whole face melted. This little angel, bringing me meat. So filial. He waved it off. No, you eat, child. Okay, I said, then I'll eat. And I put my piece down, reached over with my chopsticks, plucked the big, juicy chicken leg off the emperor's plate, and dropped it onto mine. Tang Ziyuan. You could see him replaying it in real time. Wait, I meant you eat your chicken, not mine. Crown Prince Zhao Long nearly spat his wine across the table. The princes stared like I'd just mugged a tiger. And me, I was already gnawing the leg, because a man's got to strike while the chicken's warm. He couldn't argue with a 6-year-old over poultry, obviously. But his competitive spirit, the same one that won him an empire, flared right up. He pointed at the fat lychees on my plate. "Where, do you eat lychees?" "I'll eat it," I said, and swept all his lychees off his plate too. Ding! Emperor Tang Ziyuan's mental state is unstable. White treasure chest obtained. Oh, that's the sound. That is a beautiful sound. That is the sound of money. He stared at his empty plate like it had personally betrayed him. And that's when I understood the game I was going to play for the rest of my life. This man had beaten every general, every warlord, every Khan on the continent, and he had absolutely no defense against a rude, adorable child. None. I was a cheat code wearing a jade hairpin. But a stolen chicken leg is a white chest. I wanted more. So I offered him a birthday poem. He got all warm and misty. He wasn't a flashy man, my grandfather. His birthday was just a few old friends and some grandkids. Since Empress Zheng's son died, his wife, the love of his life, he didn't care much for the pomp anymore. He patted my head. Oh, Weir can write poetry? I could, in fact. I had an entire modern brain and a very old, very famous trick poem loaded in the chamber. I looked the emperor dead in the eye and delivered the first line. This old man is not human. Ding! Blue treasure chest obtained. The hall didn't gasp. The hall stopped existing. My father went the color of a fish belly and started swaying like he might faint. The prince's eyes bugged out. The emperor's smile locked in place, stiff as a wax mask. I was actually just cursed out by a 5.5-year-old, in front of everyone, on my birthday. I let the silence hang exactly long enough. Then, A true dragon from the heavens descends to the mortal realm. He shuddered like an electric current shot up his spine. 9 heavens true dragon, my grandson really knows how to flatter. Ding, another chest. Line 3. All my sons have become thieves, and every prince at the table went pale and homicidal. Right before I closed with, he stole a peach to present to his father. 4 lines, 4 whiplash turns. Insult, worship, insult, filial piety, landed like a gymnast. Chen Haoyuan started laughing first, stroking his beard, calling it hidden gems, a blessing on the royal house. And Tang Ziyuan, a man who had been called Heavenly Khan, ruler of all under heaven, beamed like a kid who got a gold star because a wily old fox flattering him means nothing, but a naive little grandson flattering him means everything. That's just how people work. That's the whole exploit. 20 feet away, my fat uncle Zhao Min looked like he'd swallowed a live fly, because he was the smart one, the talented one, the one father favored, and a toddler had just walked in and out-charmed him at his own game. Write that name down, Zhao Min. We're going to be seeing a lot of him. That night, back in the Eastern Palace, I sprawled across a couch that cost more than most people's lives and remembered I had 3 chests to open. 2 white, 1 blue. I called them up. First white, 100 taels of silver. Fine. Second white, archery, beginner. A flood of knowledge poured in, and suddenly I had the muscle memory of a soldier who'd trained a solid year. I hadn't lifted a finger. The little archer in my head had done all the reps for me. Then the blue chest, and this one made me sit up. A strength fruit. Eat it, gain 50 jin of strength, call it half a grown man's power, permanently, poured into a 6-year-old's noodle arms. I ate it in about 4 bites. My whole body went warm, like 1,000 tiny hammers reforging my bones, and when I got up and lifted the bronze incense burner in the corner with one hand, easy as a soda can, I had exactly one thought. I've become stronger, and I haven't even gone bald. The next morning my maid Mei Li tried to wake me, and I refused on principle until roughly the last possible second, then opened one eye and announced, I was woken up by my own handsomeness. She'd learned already not to react to the things that came out of my mouth. Good instincts, that one. Remember her too. Mei Li's going to run an empire for me before this is over, because here's what I'd figured out overnight, lying there in the dark. The system wasn't a lottery. It was a loophole. Every chest I didn't open just sat there, stored, waiting. The system was a bottomless bag of holding that occasionally coughed up superpowers, and the only fuel it needed was my grandfather's blood pressure. I had a year to live and a machine that got stronger every time I made the Emperor of China feel a feeling. So I was going to make him feel a lot of feelings. Now, the emperor had gotten it into his head at the banquet that I should go to school. Hongwen Academy. Elite place, you basically had to be a prince or the grandson of a duke to get past the gate. Great for me, actually. Not for the education, for the networking. Every runny-nosed brat in that classroom was going to be a pillar of the Tang state in 20 years, and I intended to own them all. I showed up late on day 1 because the alternative was showing up on time, and I have standards. The instructor was a man named Lin Jiyuan. Kong, as in a descendant of Confucius, which he mentioned roughly every 90 seconds. Rigid, arrogant, the kind of scholar who thinks fearlessly lecturing the powerful is the height of cool. He'd already worked himself into a lather about my tardiness by the time I walked in and cupped my hands and asked sweetly, "May I ask if you are Confucius?" The whole class turned like sunflowers. Because these kids were terrified of old man Lin, and here came the emperor's grandson, walking in an hour late, asking the strictest teacher in the building if he was personally Confucius. Kong demanded to know why I was late. I spread my hands. Sleeping in. He asked if sleeping in was really that comfortable. I said without hesitation that it was. And when he sneered that a lazy child would never amount to anything, I told him that if the great career thing didn't pan out, I could always just go home and inherit my grandfather's vast empire. His forehead vein did a little dance. He could have left it there. He should have. But he decided to make it a whole thing about morals, and he made the mistake of dragging my father into it. Quoted the old line about how if the upper beam is crooked, the lower beam bends too. Meaning, your dad's trash, so you're trash. Insulting the crown prince in front of 30 kids to score a point. So I stopped smiling, and I opened up the classical texts, which, surprise, a modern brain plus a photographic royal education can wield like a machine gun. I quoted him the Book of Rites, the Zuozhuan, the classic of filial piety. I explained, at length and with receipts, that a minister screaming at the heir apparent in front of the whole school was the real breach of virtue here, a subject disrespecting his sovereign, a man with no respect for rank. I called him an old scoundrel, and I made it sound like scripture. Here's the thing people don't get about winning an argument with a guy like Kong. You cannot just outshout him. If you let him grab the moral high ground, he'll insult you, and then, if he's really committed, he'll bash his own head against a pillar and die, and go down in history as the loyal martyr the wicked prince drove to suicide. That's a real move. So you don't fight him. You take the high ground first, and you stand on it, and you smile. He trembled. He couldn't speak. His face went the red of a struck bell. And then he did the only thing left to him. He stormed off to complain to the emperor. I turned to the classroom full of noble children who were staring at me like I'd hung the moon, and I said, "Get out of class. Dismissed." They went feral, cheering, howling, stampeding for the door. Who wants to sit through the 4 books when the emperor's grandson just canonically defeated the final boss of Confucian scholars and declared recess? On my very first day, without particularly trying, I'd become the guy who gives the orders. Nobody voted on it. It just happened. The chubby kid next to me introduced himself grinning, Gao Tian, grandson of Gao Yang, one of the emperor's roughest, most beloved old generals. I nodded at him on reflex the way you nod at a subordinate, and the poor kid looked wounded, like he'd wanted a big brother and gotten a boss instead. He'd get used to it. They all would. Half a day later, I got summoned to Ganlu Hall, which is where the emperor actually worked, and where I would end up spending an enormous amount of my life farming this man for treasure like he was a respawning boss. Turns out Kong hadn't even made it through the palace gates with his complaint. The emperor had heard the gist from the Foxduke Chen Haoyuan and found the whole thing hilarious. This pedant thinks he's a loyal minister of the realm. All I did was send the kid to school, and he starts a holy war. He was going to quietly get Kong reassigned. But he still wanted to have a serious talk with me about propriety, because he was, deep down, trying to be a good grandfather. He just had no idea what he'd signed up for. I ran in and body-checked him, full speed, nearly knocked the emperor of the Tang dynasty off his feet, which, for a man in his late 40s with a lifetime of battlefield injuries, is a real risk. He grumbled and hugged me anyway, and I could feel it already. The thing that was going to matter more than any chest, this man was lonely. Bone-deep lonely. He was Heavenly Khan, and everyone under heaven feared him, and not one of them dared to just crash into his arms. His old brothers-in-arms treated him like a tiger now. His sons treated him like an emperor. Nobody treated him like a grandfather. I was about to be the exception. Started as a Khan, didn't stay one, but we'll get there. He tried his serious talk, tried to teach me a wise lesson about not letting other people's opinions ruin my mood, did the whole thing where he explained the difference between a fact and an opinion, very pleased with himself, an emperor patiently enlightening the youth. If someone calls me ambitious, extravagant, autocratic, he said, building to his big finish, you don't get angry because it's true, I said. Ding. White treasure chest. He took a long breath and decided, visibly, to never think about that sentence again, or he'd never sleep. Then he made me a promise, behave at school, and he'd take me on the autumn hunt. And, since a son of the Li family had to be good with a bow, he'd get me a martial arts teacher. He took my hand and led me out to a training arena, and standing there in full black iron armor, eyes like copper bells, was General Bai Wuji, one of the 2 most fearsome warriors in the entire Tang army, a man whose name mothers used to frighten children. They handed me a custom-made little ebony bow, 30 jin of draw weight. Everyone in that courtyard, including the emperor, expected me to fail to bend it, because I was 6, because that's the whole point. Let the raw jade bump into a wall and learn humility. Yuchi bet I could maybe pull it 30%. The emperor, feeling generous, said 70. I drew it to full. Then I put an arrow through the bullseye. Then 2 more. Ding! Yuchi's copper bell eyes went wide enough to roll out of his skull. The emperor's hand froze mid-beard stroke, and I, feeling my strength fruit in my beginner archery working in perfect harmony, decided to twist the knife. I looked up all innocent and said I wished I could do the 4-arrow rapid-fire technique. You know, hit the fletching of the first arrow with the second, and could Pops demonstrate, since it's the top skill of the 5 schools of archery, and surely a man of his talent. Ding ding, neither of them could do it. I watched 2 of the deadliest men of the century invent increasingly elaborate excuses for why real men don't do fancy archery, while I stood there radiating pure innocence, and the treasure chests just kept dropping. That was the whole afternoon. That was, honestly, going to be the whole year. They swapped Old Man Lin out for a gentle scholar named Su Yang, who made the mistake of trying to organize the class. See, most of the academy's teachers were being pulled away to help my fat uncle Zhao Min finish some big geography project he'd been compiling to make himself look scholarly and airworthy. So Xu Yang decided to appoint one student as a sort of senior to help manage the rest. I heard the word senior, found it clunky, and suggested we call the role class monitor instead. He liked it, held a vote. I won in a landslide, obviously. I was the kid who'd gotten Kong fired and canceled school. These noble brats would have followed me into a volcano. And this is the part where I want you to understand that I did not set out to run a criminal enterprise. It just kept being the path of least resistance. As class monitor, I covered for the kids who hadn't done their homework. Teacher Zhou would ask where 38 assignments were, and I'd hand him about 8 and count them out loud. 1, 2, 5, 10, 20, 31, 37, 38, with total confidence, and dare him to contradict me. Naturally, the little brats were grateful. Naturally, they showed their gratitude with gifts. Naturally, the gifts got out of hand. 5 days into the job, Xu Yang did the math and reported to the Foxduke, who reported to the emperor, that his beloved grandson had accepted 6,000 strings of cash in bribes in 5 days, enough to buy a mansion in the capital. Gao Yang's grandson had stolen a gilt bronze horse for me. Huang Kong's grandson had handed over his savings. A kid named Xiao Feng contributed a rhinoceros horn go set he'd lifted off his grandfather. A little Fang boy brought his mother's jade scepter. I remembered every single one, and when the emperor summoned me and demanded to know how a 6-year-old ran a 5-day bribery operation, I told him, with total sincerity, it wasn't a bribe. It was the deep friendship among classmates. Ding! They stripped me of the class monitor title. The next day, the students re-elected me. Xu Yang, mortified, held the vote again, to be sure. They elected me again. He held it a third time. Third landslide. He gave up. And when the emperor lectured me about the corrupting influence of accepting gifts and made me promise to stop, I promised instantly, and then explained the fine print. I can refuse to accept them, but they can't refuse to deliver them. Let the corrupt winds of officialdom blow. Your grandson can withstand the test. The emperor put his face in his hands. But somewhere behind the exasperation, I could see the gears turning because he just realized something that unsettled him a little. A 6-year-old had walked into a room full of the arrogant sons of the most powerful families in the empire, and in 5 days, without a single order, made every one of them his. Whatever that was, it wasn't child's play. The autumn hunt is where the ground really shifted. The emperor set a prize, a snow-white jade pendant, the one thing on him that had belonged to his dead empress. To the princes, that pendant wasn't jade. It was a public scoreboard of father's favor, and the succession was wide open, and so every one of my uncles rode out into those woods that day trying to kill the most animals and win the one prize that actually meant something. My father, limping from an old riding injury, rode out too, because a crown prince on thin ice can't afford not to. I stayed with Pops. And when a tiger, a real one, that the guards had somehow missed while clearing the grounds, came prowling out of the tree line and 100 imperial guards leveled their spears, my grandfather, veteran of 1,000 battles, just laughed, raised his legendary longbow, and put an arrow clean through its neck from horseback. The thing dropped after 3 steps. The whole camp cheered. He turned to me, glowing, fishing for a compliment. "Pops," I said, staring at the bow, "when you die, can I have that?" Ding! Blue chest. His eyelid twitched. "You don't have to wait for me to die," he managed. "It's yours now." Humiliated into gifting me a priceless war bow by a child. Beautiful. But the real event came back at the tents, when they tallied the kills. Uncle Xiao Wen had shot the most, but fat Uncle Zhao Min had captured 13 animals alive, killing none, and his pet minister, a slimy fellow named Sun Chao, immediately spun it into a whole speech about how the Prince of Wei's refusal to kill showed his benevolent, sage king heart, clearly the most worthy of the pendant. Very smooth, very calculated. The image Zhao Min had been building for years, the wise, gentle, merciful prince. I couldn't help myself. "You, Prince Consort Chai, are talking nonsense." The tent went silent. And then I asked the room a simple question. By this logic, that not killing proves benevolence, what did that make my grandfather? The man who went to war at 14 and killed tens of thousands to found this dynasty? Was he not benevolent? Was the emperor of the Tang dynasty less compassionate than a fat man who declined to shoot some rabbits? You could hear Zhao Min's soul leave his body, because now the trap was sprung. Either agree that the emperor was unbenevolent, or admit the whole Sage King act was garbage. Sun Chao opened and closed his mouth like a fish, and then I turned it warm. I recited my grandfather's entire war record, Huo Yi, Hulao Pass, where he captured 2 kings in a single battle, the destruction of the Eastern Turks, and I reframed all of it. The killing wasn't bloodlust, it was the price of founding a dynasty, of dragging a shattered world into peace. Ruthless methods, a compassionate heart. Great benevolence that saved everyone. The #1 general of the Tang, a god of war to rank beside the ancients. Ding! The emperor laughed until the tent shook. He'd handed out titles his whole life and never once been called a general, the highest thing you could call a soldier, by a grandson who clearly worshipped him. Then he asked who should get the pendant, and I said it should go to Uncle Xiao Wen, who'd earned it, which was gracious of me and cost me nothing. And the emperor looked around at his sons, grown men, princes of the realm, all of them outclassed by a 6-year-old, and gave the pendant, his dead wife's pendant, the single most loaded object in the empire, to me. The favor didn't shift that day, it moved. It picked itself up and walked across the room and sat down next to me, and every prince in that tent watched it happen. Zhao Min looked like he was chewing glass. That night I opened 4 more chests, 100 taels of silver, a perfume-making skill, an inexplicable snowman-building skill, genuinely, thank you, system, very useful, and a blue chest that gave me Zhang Sanfeng's Tai Chi at master level, which meant I now had decades of internal martial arts wired into my body. In a dynasty where princes died young of nothing at all, being able to keep myself alive and healthy was worth more than gold. But across the city, in the Prince of Wei's mansion, fat Uncle Zhao Min was already at work. His mother's death anniversary was 3 months out. He announced he'd hand-copy Buddhist scriptures for her, to display his filial piety and win father back. His faction murmured about betting everything on his rise, and one of them said, quiet and ugly, the phrase that hangs over this whole family like a blade, Xuanwu Gate, the place where my grandfather killed his own brothers and forced his father off the throne to take it. Love you, bro. See you at Xuanwu Gate. That's the water I was swimming in. A palace where the last succession was settled in blood, and the next one was wide open, and I just made myself the favorite by accident, with a chicken leg and a poem, 11 months before my own father was scheduled to blow us all up. I had a system, a war bow, a jade pendant, and a target on my back I hadn't fully earned yet. Time to earn it. Here's a sentence I never expected to say. The thing that made me famous across the entire capital started as a drawing lesson, and it nearly got two of my best friends beaten half to death. It went like this. I owed my sidekick Gao Tian a reward for doing all my homework, so I taught him a skill I'd pulled from a chest, sketching. Not Tang-style painting, which is all spirit and freehand and capturing the soul of a thing. Realistic sketching. Photographic. A few strokes of charcoal and there's a person on the page, eyelashes and all. To these kids, it looked like sorcery. In minutes, half the class was crowded around me, begging to learn, offering to steal their father's antiques, offering to introduce their sisters. One kid offered to be my henchman. One kid announced he'd washed his bottom clean, and I had him removed from the premises. So I taught them. And here is the flaw in my plan that I did not adequately consider. When you teach a room full of 8-year-old boys to draw realistically, and you let them pick their own subjects, they do not draw mountains. They draw women, curvy ones, enthusiastically. Huang Kong's grandson, little Huang Bo, drew a buxom young lady and proudly presented it to his grandfather, the most famously rigid, incorruptible, straight-backed minister in the entire Tang court, and got beaten with a willow branch and made to kneel in the ancestral hall all day. Gao Tian showed his second sister his masterpiece and got hung from a tree by his grandfather, the terrifying old General Gao Yong, who ripped his pants off and paddled his backside raw while roaring about cleansing the family's reputation. Both of them came to school the next day bruised, swollen, and, this is the beautiful part, getting compared unfavorably to me. Their own families beat them and then scolded them for not being as smart, as talented, or as handsome as the imperial grandson. Without lifting a finger, I had become the other people's child, haunting the nightmares of every noble household in the capital. And then it escalated all the way to the throne. Huang Kong and Gao Yong both stormed Ganlu Hall to impeach me, the 6-year-old corrupting the youth with lewd art. Gao Yong, comparing his grandson's drawing to Huang Bo's, actually paused mid-complaint to mutter, "This erotic drawing is better than my son's," which nearly gave Huang Kong a stroke on the spot. I got summoned. Two of the most powerful men in the empire, red-faced, holding my students' drawings of thick women as evidence against me, and my grandfather, trying to keep a straight face, asked how I could teach the grandsons of dukes to draw dirty pictures. I glanced at the drawings. I said, Huang Bo is improving, Gao Tian still needs practice. That was not the review they were expecting, but here's where I turned it. I told them this wasn't lewd art, this was a tool of justice, and when incorruptible old Huang Kong scoffed, I asked him a question. How many wanted criminals does the Tang dynasty actually catch off its wanted posters? And the answer, which everyone in that room knew, was basically none, because the posters are drawn hastily by mediocre painters from vague descriptions, and they look nothing like the target. You could hand a criminal his own wanted poster and he wouldn't recognize himself, so I proposed a demonstration. I pulled out my charcoal, told Huang Kong to describe someone I'd never met. Face shape, brow, nose, a birthmark, everything, by HUD, and I sketched while he talked. When I turned the paper around, Huang Kong stopped breathing. It was his own wife. 70% likeness from a verbal description of a woman I had never laid eyes on. He told me which parts were off. Smaller ears, thinner face, longer chin. I adjusted, flipped it back, and he choked out that it was now 90% her. The room went dead silent, because they just watched me reconstruct a stranger's face from words alone, something the court's master painters couldn't do. And rigid, incorruptible Huang Kong, the man who'd bashed the emperor himself with criticism, cupped his hands and bowed to me and apologized. Within days, sketching was an official skill of the Ministry of Justice and the Court of Judicial Review. My lewd art became the empire's forensic sketching program. And then, after Huang Kong and Gao Yong left, my grandfather got quiet and asked me for a favor. A real one, hesitant, the kind of thing an emperor doesn't know how to ask. He wanted me to draw his wife, Empress Zhang Sun, Grandma. The woman who died a year before I was born, whose face I'd never seen, who the court painters had only ever rendered as a generic, kind, dignified figure, resembling her maybe 3 or 4 parts out of 10. He wanted a real face, one accurate portrait of the woman he'd lost. And that was the first time I understood that under the heavenly Khan, under the god of war, there was just a widower who couldn't remember his wife's face clearly anymore and was afraid to say it out loud. I told him I'd take care of it. Hold on to that. It comes back around, in the snow. While all this was happening, I was quietly building an empire. See, the perfume-making skill from that white chest was a license to print money, and I knew it. In a world with no real cosmetics industry, a scent that lingered for days was worth an obscene amount to exactly the right people, the noble ladies of the capital. The problem was, Tang law forbade officials and their families from running businesses. So I did what any enterprising 6-year-old does. I conned my grandfather into fixing the law for me. I beat him at a rigged sparring match, bet him I could push him off a floor tile within the time it took to drink a cup of tea, then fainted by yelling, "Oh Dad, what brings you here?" And when he turned to look, swung a wooden sword up between his legs. He leapt back off the tile. I won. That's the real art of war, Pops. He owed me one request, and instead of anything reasonable, I asked to open a shop. He sighed, and then, because he was, underneath everything, a crafty old fox himself, he showed me the loophole. Put the shop under the jurisdiction of the inner palace, make my maid the nominal manager, and now it's a royal supply house that no censor can touch. Old ginger, spicier. That's how Longchang Firm was born. My maid Mei Li ran the floor. I ran her from the palace. We opened in the East Market, in the most expensive quarter of the capital, directly across the street from an established rouge shop. The owner watched us set up and laughed. laughed. New shop, insane rent, won't last a season, his loss. His assistant was still smirking on opening morning when the first carriage pulled up, and it was the wife of the Duke of Lu, then the Duke of Ying's wife, then the Duke of Zhao's, then a carriage the assistant didn't recognize, and out of it stepped a man with a delicate, beardless face and a palace gait, and the old shopkeeper across the street stopped breathing, because he'd run that market a decade, and he knew a palace eunuch when he saw one. People from the palace, coming to shop. His scalp went so tight I could feel it from the Eastern Palace. 500 bottles in 3 days, 2,000 strings, and I sat back and gave Mei Li the blackest-hearted business advice I could think of. Never sell in bulk. Keep it scarce. Keep it insulting expensive. When the ladies fight over the last bottle, don't make more, make them want it more. And every festival, release a limited co-branded edition, nicer box, same perfume, 5 times the price. My sweet, cuddly imperial grandson, Mei Li decided, watching me lay this out, is completely rotten inside. She wasn't wrong. Within the year, Longchang would open shops across Guangzhong, then across the south when the emperor granted me that Jiangnan land, and I'd send Mei Li off to conquer the Jiangnan market herself while my new bookkeeper, Feng Lan, remember her, kept the ledgers I taught her in the modern arithmetic no one else in the dynasty could read. I hit up my father for the startup capital, of course. When he puffed his chest out about funding his son's first venture, I held up one finger. He laughed. 1,000 strings. Easy. I told him 1,000 strings was how you fob off a child. 10,000. His smile froze solid. Best 10,000 strings he ever spent, though I did not let him keep any of the profit. The perfume is also how I got dragged into the orbit of Princess Li Hua. Li Hua was my grandfather's youngest and most beloved daughter, technically my aunt, though only 4 years older than me, 10 to my 6. The emperor loved her so fiercely he'd raised her himself in the palace after the empress died. She was clever, gentle, quick-witted enough to talk the emperor out of a rage. And, here's the part I couldn't shake, in the history I remembered, she died at 12. I didn't say that out loud, but I filed it away. I met her at her 10th birthday, at a banquet the emperor cleared out an entire hall for. I gave her a bottle of my perfume. Bad idea, in retrospect. The room full of noble girls got one whiff and turned into a pack of wolves. They'd never smelled anything like a scent that lasted for days, and every one of them wanted it. Now. And would I please make more? And could they pre-order? And one of them wanted to hug me. And by the end of the night, I had a wall of orders and a lipstick print on my forehead from an enthusiastic older sister I never identified. My friend Bai Han, old Bai Wuji's grandson, a stocky, dark-faced kid who eats with both hands, watched me get mauled and solemnly vowed to avoid women forever. I told him not to worry. He didn't have my problem. Fat Uncle Zhao Min turned up too and tried to belittle my sketching as a strange little trick unworthy of a royal. So I looked at his gut and observed, sweetly, that failing to control one's appetite until one is bloated and fat is also not worthy of imitation. The room strangled its laughter. Then Pops walked in, and Zhao Min, who'd spent weeks publicly copying scriptures to look filial, sneered again about my useless little skills right in front of the emperor. So I helpfully informed the emperor that fourth uncle had told me sketching was worthless, the same sketching the emperor had personally ordered into the Ministry of Justice. He frowned and lectured Zhao Min, in front of everyone, on the difference between practical statecraft and empty scholarship. And then I twisted it. Everyone else's belly is full of knowledge, I said, but fourth uncle's is full of something else. His eyes went red, and instead of defending him, Pops told him he really should lose some weight. That's the pattern. And I want you to notice it because it runs the whole length of this story. Every single time Zhao Min tries to step on me, I don't just dodge. I turn him around and use his own momentum to bury him a little deeper, in public, in front of the one man whose opinion decides everything. He never learned, not once. Winter came, and with it the biggest emotional payload of my life so far, and I want to slow down for it because it's the one part of that year I don't tell as a joke. The anniversary of Empress Zhongsun's death was coming. 7 years she'd been gone, and every single year, rain or shine, my grandfather went in person to her mausoleum at Jiaoling, in the mountains northwest of the city, and talked to her tablet, and came home hollow. This was the wife he'd married at 13, who'd walked through Xuanwu Gate at his side on the worst day of his life, who'd borne him 7 children, and should have grown old surrounded by grandchildren, and instead died at the height of his glory. 7 years, and he was still steady as the Green Mountains, and it was eating him alive. Here's the thing I hadn't told anyone. A few days earlier, a chest had dropped me something new, not silver, not a skill. Intelligence, information about the future. In 1 month, it said, an unprecedented blizzard, the worst in 20 years, would hammer the north, all the way up into the Turkic lands. I'd shrugged at the time. What did a blizzard 1,000 miles away have to do with me? But standing at the foot of Jiaoling that cold, gray, heavy-skied morning, watching my grandfather pour a year of grief into a sandalwood tablet, I did the math. Blizzards don't arrive overnight. That cold front had to be crawling south for days. And the sky over us was low and swollen and wrong, like the whole world was holding its breath. So when he finished, red-eyed, and we started down, I planted a seed. I told him, casually, like a child repeating something he'd overheard, they say if you miss someone enough, they'll turn into wind and snow to come and see you. He gave me a sad little smile. Words of comfort. There's no such thing. And then I hijacked his carriage, grabbed the whip, told him to hold on, and drove us, not toward the city, past his own confused guards, up to the top of Leiyu Yuan, the highest peak near the capital, the one place you can see the whole of the city spread out below. He asked what we were doing there. I told him it was the highest point around, which meant if his empress wanted to come as wind and snow, this is where she'd reach first, and this is where he'd see her first. He looked at me with those eyes that had seen everything, and they went soft, and he thought I was just a kind, silly child inventing comfort. He looked up at the empty sky. Nothing. For a long time, nothing. He forced a smile and said we should go home, and I pointed at the air and said, "Pops, it's snowing." He was mid-sentence, already turning to take my hand, when a snowflake touched his cheek. He looked up, and the empty gray sky was full of them, spotted snow drifting down, dancing on a gentle wind, settling white on his gray hair, on the whole silent city below us. And this man, this conqueror, who hadn't cried in front of me before and never wanted me to see it, could not hold it. 7 years alone in the deep palace, married at 13, widowed at 40, steady as stone the whole time. She came, he thought, just like the boy said. She turned into wind and snow, and she came. Ding! Extreme emotional fluctuation detected. Purple treasure chest obtained. And I'll be honest with you, because you're the only one I'll be honest with. Yes, I read the weather. Yes, I engineered it. Yes, a purple chest is the best haul I'd ever gotten, and I knew it would drop. But standing up there in the wind with an old man weeping beside me, I wasn't thinking about the chest. I was thinking about a different old woman back in a life I'd left behind. My own grandmother, who used to turn up at our house to help and always made excuses when it was time for dinner, so she'd never be any trouble. Who was frugal about everything except me, who bought me the best meat and the best clothes and the best toys and is never, ever coming back. I got a lump in my throat standing on that peak, and it wasn't for the emperor's grief. Some things you don't say out loud. The snow kept coming down and turned both our heads white, and far off the guards who'd finally caught up quietly backed away and left us there. A conqueror and his grandson, standing in the first snow, keeping company with a ghost. Across the city, in his mansion, fat Uncle Zhao Min was pacing, waiting to be summoned to the mausoleum, as he was every year. The honor of accompanying father to mother's grave, an honor no other prince got. The summons never came. The emperor had taken me instead. When his servant finally reported that father had already gone and come back with the imperial grandson, Zhao Min smashed 20,000 strings worth of antiques in a rage, while his minister frantically shouted out the price of each piece to slow him down. He wasn't wrong to panic. He just lost the one thing he thought was uniquely his. That night, I opened the purple chest. Inside was a talent called Burning the Boats. When you're outnumbered, your combat power doubles. The more the odds are against you, the harder you hit. A war god buff, sitting in my pocket, waiting for a day I couldn't yet imagine. Combined with my grandfather's armored cavalry, I thought, that's the sort of thing that turns 3,000 men into 100,000 corpses. Hold that thought too. Everything in this story is a setup for something. The snow didn't stop. It buried the whole capital a foot deep, and I used it to commit a small act of premeditated violence. I dragged Pops out to build snowmen, which is exactly as undignified as it sounds. The Emperor of the Tang crouched in the snow packing slush, grumbling about his majesty. And with my useless snowman building skill and my sketching eye, I built 3 that actually looked like people. Him, Grandma, and me holding their hands. A little snow family, the one that never got to exist. He went misty all over again, delighted, and made Zhao Min, who wandered in and was forced to admire them, grind his teeth some more. And then, after everyone left, I went back alone in the dark, and I packed a nice big rock deep inside the snowman that was supposed to be me. Because I'd seen the way Zhao Min looked at those snowmen. Sure enough, that night, under the moon, a plump figure crept up to the snowmen to destroy the thing his nephew had loved, hesitated at the ones of his parents, and settled for kicking mine flat. His foot met the rock. He broke his toe. He shrieked like a slaughtered pig, slipped in the snow, and came down tailbone first on the sharp edge of that same rock, which is a polite way of saying the corner of the stone went somewhere no stone corner should go. The guards found him howling in the snow next to my toppled snowman. He was bedridden for a month. The injury, I want to be clear about the injury, was to his backside, internally. My mother wouldn't tell me where he was hurt. Princess Lihua came all the way to the Eastern Palace, ostensibly to warn me and secretly to ally with me. She liked me. She disliked Zhao Min. She wanted first dibs on new perfume, and she wouldn't say either, just giggled. I had to send my other maid to gather intelligence. The Prince of Wei, she reported, blushing, had a broken toe and a punctured anus. Evil got its just desserts. But I wasn't done, because the emperor, disgusted that his own son had snuck out to smash a child's snowman, was already primed. So I cooked. I made a dish. 9 turned intestines, a real delicacy if you clean the intestines. I did not clean the intestines. I left them, as I later put it, in their original flavor, and I added a generous amount of my homegrown chili. And I brought it, with my grandfather in tow, to the bedside of my grievously wounded uncle, radiating filial concern to nourish him back to health. Zhao Min smelled a trap immediately because he's not actually stupid and tried to decline. But Pops, still furious about the snowman, and touched that his darling grandson would repay evil with kindness, ordered him to eat it, made a whole speech about it. A Lee man endures hardship. Your father took arrows to the chest, 3,000 armored soldiers against 100,000, and you can't eat a little tonic your nephew spent 2 hours cooking. A maid spooned it into Zhao Min's mouth. He chewed. His face changed. His eyes went black, because it tasted, unmistakably, of chili and human excrement. He gagged. He couldn't spit it out with the emperor right there. He tried to protest that there was, his words, poop in it, and I looked up all innocent and said, "Fourth uncle, there's always poop in the large intestine. Maybe I didn't clean it properly." And when he demanded to know whether I'd done it on purpose, I delivered the checkmate. "Fourth uncle, I'm not a chef," which is unarguable. I am not, in fact, a chef. Mistakes happen. And Pops, hearing this, nodded. The boy's not a professional. It's a normal mistake. And Zhao Min lay there having eaten actual excrement in front of the emperor, unable to prove anything, while I helpfully handed my grandfather a stick in case he wanted to discipline his ungrateful son. Ding! He rinsed his mouth for half an hour and still couldn't get the taste out. And when nature called that evening, with his injury, it was, by all accounts, a very difficult experience. My father, meanwhile, was so gleeful about his fat brother's suffering that my mother had to physically talk him out of throwing a celebration banquet. For years, Zhao Min had overshadowed him, the favored son, the four-wise king reputation, everything but the title itself, and his 6-year-old had, in the space of a season, made the man break his own toe on a booby-trapped snowman and eat literal shit. My dad wanted to kowtow to me. I told him to be a little more composed. It's not a good look, a father envying his son. But I could feel the year turning under my feet. The chicken and the poem were behind me. The perfume empire was printing money. The favor had moved to my side of the room. And out in the world, 1,000 miles north, that blizzard the chest had promised me was finally rolling down out of the sky, and it was about to hand me the moment where I stopped being the emperor's clever, cruel little pet and became something the whole court would have to take seriously. Before I tell you how I stopped a war, I have to tell you how I ruined the Analects for my grandfather, because it's important that you understand the exact texture of what this man put up with daily. He liked to quiz me, fatherly, teacherly, testing whether the academy was rubbing off. So one afternoon, he opened with the classic line of Confucius, "If I hear the way in the morning, I can die content in the evening," and asked me to explain it. "That's easy," I said. "It means," Confucius said, "if you find the way to your house in the morning, you can just wait to die in the evening." Ding! His smile locked. He tried another. What did the master mean when he said he didn't speak of strange forces or disorder? Confucius didn't want to talk to you, I explained, so he used his superhuman strength to beat you until you lost your mind. Ding! He tried a third. I translated it as another beating. By the time I was done, according to my scholarship, the entire Analects was just Confucius threatening to beat people to death, and my grandfather was sitting there with a face full of black lines, wondering if that was, in fact, what the sage had meant all along. Then I offered to quiz him back, and this is my favorite. I asked him a chain of questions he could answer in his sleep. Who was Zhou Yu's wife? Xiao Chao. Her sister? Da Chao. Da Chao's husband? Sun Ce. And on down the family tree. Sun Shangshang, Liu Bei, Liu Shan, all the way down, him getting smugger with every answer, until I asked the last one. What should Zhou Yu call Shahu Dun? His smile died. He didn't know. He sat there, the ruler of all under heaven, and he could not figure out what Zhou Yu should call Shahu Dun, and I got bored and left him to it. Hours later, alone in his hall, he slammed the table and shouted, "Uncle! At least of the same generation as an uncle!" startling the Fox Duke Chen Haoyuan so badly the poor man nearly had a heart attack. That's the level of psychological warfare I was running, every single day. There was the day I walked into Ganlu Hall and startled him so badly he yanked open the cage of a rare crystal fire phoenix the Persians had gifted him, and the bird shot out the door and was gone. He wouldn't tell me what happened, just muttered, "It's gone." So I asked, with enormous concern, what happened to Pops's bird? He said it flew away. I told him that was impossible. A bird can't just fly away. And now, I noted, he was exactly like his old chief eunuch, whose bird was also gone. Ding. It took him a full, horrified moment to work out that the bird I was condoling him over was not the bird that had flown away. Then I pivoted to lecturing him. A ruler of the 10 circuits shouldn't be playing with pet birds. Playing with trifles saps the will, and if the incorruptible Huang Kong caught him at it, there'd be spit flying everywhere. So really, the bird ran off at a very good time. If it hadn't, I said, I, his loyal, outspoken grandson, would have had to speak frankly to him about it myself. He asked, weakly, whether I intended to become a second Huang Kong and torture him for the rest of his life. I told him it was simply my duty as his grandson. Ding. I also got hauled in front of him over the annual exams, which I want to mention because it's the one time the school reported me for something good. My calligraphy paper had stopped the scholars cold. I'd pulled a master-level slender gold script from a chest, and to a room full of Tang literati it read like the work of a founding calligraphy sage, from a 6-year-old, ranked first in the entire academy. They brought it to the emperor while fat Uncle Zhao Min happened to be there. He assumed, as always, that a report from the academy meant I was in trouble. Wrong. He had to sit and watch our grandfather beam and pass my paper around to every minister in the room. And Zhao Min was a genuinely gifted calligrapher. It was the one arena where he had real pride. So he had to look at handwriting more beautiful than his own, off the brush of the nephew he despised, and call it vigorous and sharp, elegant and refined, through gritted teeth. The gap between us, he was learning, was not something he could close by being smart. I was cheating, he just couldn't prove it. The empire kept growing. Off a soap-making chest, I added soap, toothpaste, and toothbrushes to Longchang Firm, and the capital lost its mind again. But the products weren't the point. The point was the day I brought my grandfather his New Year gifts, and buried under the toothbrushes and soap, handed him two things that would matter more than everything else I ever did: chili peppers and sweet potatoes. The chili he sampled by bragging he could eat anything and then chugging water with his whole face on fire, which is its own story. The sweet potato is the one that made his eyes burn, because I told him what it did. It wasn't picky about soil, it stored well, and it yielded, I said this plainly, up to 1,000 caddies per mu. In a dynasty where a good field gave you 200 or 300 caddies and a bad harvest meant people ate bark, I had just set a strange lumpy root in front of the emperor and told him it could quadruple the floor under a famine. He didn't fully believe me, but he wanted to. 1,000 caddy crop is the kind of thing that gets an emperor remembered for 1,000 years. I'd also built a greenhouse by then, a from fire pavilion, I called it, with mica sheet windows and hollow fire channels in the walls, growing chili and grapes and cucumbers in the dead of winter. Cost me 10,000 strings. I offered to build him one in the palace, and when he did the emperor thing and refused to spend my money, I told him the thing that landed, the thing I meant. Others only see your throne. I see the wrinkles at the corners of your eyes. He took the greenhouse. Around this time, the emperor did me the single most useful favor of his life, entirely by accident, and I have to tell you how, because it's the funniest misunderstanding of the whole year. Delivering gifts through the harem, I bumped into a low-ranking palace concubine, Talent Feng, 19, cool-faced, forced into the palace at 14 by an ambitious family, ignored by the emperor for 5 years, quietly rotting toward the fate all childless concubines share when their emperor dies. A nunnery. I knew her, though. Everyone from my old world knew her, Feng Lan. The woman who, in the history I remembered, would climb from exactly this rung all the way to the throne itself and nearly end my family's dynasty. So I gave her a gift, and I filed her under problems to solve later. Then, when the emperor offered me a reward, I asked him to expel one person from the palace, Talent Feng. And my grandfather, this genius, this heavenly Khan, took one look at the fact that his precocious little grandson wanted a specific young woman removed and concluded that I had a crush and was too shy to say so and wanted her out of the harem so I could take her for myself later. What a precocious child. No wonder he's my grandson. So instead of expelling her, he stripped her of her concubine rank and transferred her directly to the Eastern Palace to be my head lady in waiting. To serve me, full-time. Wu Zetian, the future empress who would haunt my bloodline, delivered to my doorstep by her own would-be victim to fetch my tea. I opened my mouth to object, and then I closed it, because actually, this was better. Under my own roof, under my own eye, she couldn't cause any trouble. And in the history I knew, the thing that let her seize power wasn't her cunning. It was that a weak emperor handed her the reins, so I simply resolved never to hand her anything. And as it turned out, she was brilliant. She picked up the modern arithmetic I taught my managers faster than anyone. She had a merchant father's head for numbers, and within weeks, she was the one I trusted to run the books at Longchang Firm. I neutralized the most dangerous woman in Chinese history by giving her a job she was good at. You're welcome, Dynasty. I'll tell you the one thing that stuck with me about her, though. The emperor had met her exactly once in 5 years back, when a wild horse called Lion nobody could tame was tearing up the stables, and this teenage concubine stepped forward and said she could break it if they gave her 3 things: an iron whip, an iron hammer, and a dagger. Whip it into submission. If that fails, hammer its skull. If that fails, cut its throat. Everyone gasped at her nerve. The emperor praised her ambition out loud, and then never sent for her again, because a man who conquered a continent knows exactly how much to fear a woman who talks like that. So she rotted in the harem for 5 years, and rotting in the harem is precisely the thing that made her patient enough and hungry enough to become what history remembers. Give a wolf like that nothing to bite on, and she stays a very good bookkeeper. I intended to keep her extremely well fed with spreadsheets. Around the turn of the year, I got the full family holiday experience, which mostly meant more opportunities to torment my grandfather in public. The Lunar New Year banquet. He did his private version. Old friends and grandchildren. No ceremony. I kowtowed and wished him long life, but I overshot the standard by rather a lot. May the imperial pops live to 200. The whole hall flinched, because 200 is an unlucky, jarring number to wish on a man. When he asked why not 100 like everyone else, I explained, counting on my fingers, that after tonight he'd be 45, then 46, then creeping toward 50, then 60, then 70. That a wish for 100 years is a reminder you're already most of the way to the grave, so 200 is the kinder number. Ding! He sat there realizing I'd just walked him through his own aging out loud. He handed out red envelopes, gold-cast Kaiyuan coins, collector's pieces, the kind of thing worth far more than their weight because they came from the emperor's hand. I loved mine. He offered me a second one. Kowtow again, get another envelope. So I looked up at him and asked sweetly whether if I gave him a red envelope, he would kowtow to me. Ding, blue chest. The whole hall strangled its laughter. My father nearly fainted. And then I magnanimously produced 2 envelopes I'd prepared in advance, one for Pops and one for Dad, so nobody felt left out, which somehow made it worse. Ding! Then came the pitch pot game, tossing arrows into a jar for a pooled prize. Every prince stepped back a respectful few paces and landed theirs. When my turn came, I proposed we each make a New Year's wish before we threw, for luck. Lovely idea, everyone agreed. Right up until I walked 10 full steps back from the jar, announced, I wish for the Imperial Pops' long life and good health, and hurled the arrow from so far away it clipped the rim and bounced onto the floor. My grandfather practically dove across the room to drag me up to arm's length from the jar so I couldn't sabotage my own well-wishing. I threw from a meter away, wished him long life again, and deliberately let it clatter off the edge. Ding! The princes looked at me like I was insane. But you and I both know a missed arrow is worth a treasure chest, and my grandfather's health is worth 2. Somewhere in there, I also served him hot pot with my homegrown chili, because he'd bragged for the 10th time that he could eat anything spicy, dogwood and ginger raw, back in the day, and I wanted to see it. He made it about 4 bites before he was gulping water with tears streaming and his face the color of the broth. When I asked how it was, he insisted, wheezing, that a little spice was nothing, and that the chili had a marvelous rejuvenating effect and made him look years younger. When I pointed out that the younger glow was just the 2nd-degree burns, ding, another chest. He genuinely could not stop himself walking into these. I want that on the record. It was never entrapment. He volunteered every time. And underneath the teasing, I'd started a quieter campaign because I'd done the math a different way. My whole survival plan rested on one thing: this man living long enough to hand me the throne. And this man slept at midnight and rose before the roosters, hunched over memorials every night, driving himself like a plow ox because, as he told me once, an emperor can rest, but the people can't wait. Very noble, very fatal. So I nagged him about it constantly. I recited him the old rhyme about how the man who sleeps at midnight and rises at dawn writes his last words early. I told him, to his face, that his lifestyle was worse than an animal's. Ding! When he protested he was in perfect health, I told him that as long as he kept it up, the throne would just pass to me sooner. And watch that one land, because I'm the grandson he trusts, and I know medicine, and the thought that I might be right genuinely rattled him. Then I gave him the fix: Tai Chi. The health set, slow and round and strange, that I'd pulled from a chest, I taught him the movements, narrating them with names I made up on the spot. Shuffle the cards, wipe the cards, look at the cards, you win. Which is not, I'm told, how one traditionally teaches martial arts. He complained. Then he noticed the warmth spreading through his old, campaign-battered body, and shut up and asked to run it again. When he asked where I'd learned it, I told him the truth with a little decoration. An old Taoist named San Feng taught it to me in a dream, and my grandfather, whose Li clan claims descent from Lao Tzu himself, the founder of Taoism, went very still, and decided that his ancestral sage had appeared in a vision to bless his most gifted descendant. I did not correct him. If the Holy Ancestor wants to take credit for keeping my grandfather alive to see me crowned, the Holy Ancestor is welcome to it. Now, the war. A month after that future blizzard intelligence dropped, a letter reached the court from the Western Turks. Their 2 Khans were at each other's throats. The aggressive northern one, Yibi Dulu, was crushing the friendlier southern one, who was begging the Tang for reinforcements, and the whole court wanted to send them. Every general in the room, Gao Yong, Bai Wuji, the great strategists Li Jing and Li Ji, the chancellors, all of them leaned toward marching, because the northern Khan was a wolf who'd threaten the western regions if he won, and a chance to smack him down was a chance worth taking. I wandered into the middle of this, came to bother Pops for a snack, honestly, and when he explained the debate to amuse me, I heard the word Turkic, and everything clicked. So I said the thing that made the whole hall go quiet: don't send troops. If our army marches into Turkic territory right now, it will be annihilated. Everyone looked at the 6-year-old like he was doing a bit. Even Huang Kong scolded me for talking about state affairs. But then old Li Jing, the quietest, deadliest strategist in the room, the one who'd stayed silent through the whole debate because something was already bothering him, turned and asked me, seriously, how I could possibly know the Turkic lands were under a blizzard when it had barely snowed in the capital. So I didn't answer with the blizzard, I answered with a question. Where, I asked, does the capital's beef and mutton come from? And Li Jing, frowning, said what everyone knew, 90% of it, from Lingzhou and the north. And I said, my mother's been trying to buy beef and mutton to make me nourishing soup because I'm a growing boy, and the servants keep telling her the price has skyrocketed and the supply has dried up, even for the palace. If it's like this in the palace, ordinary people can't buy any at all, and there's no war in the north to cause it. So it's not war, that leaves weather. And ordinary snow doesn't collapse the meat supply of an entire region. Only a catastrophe, a killing blizzard, freezing cattle and sheep dead by the thousands, does that. The hall went absolutely silent. Ding, because I hadn't cited a prophecy. I'd read the future off a butcher's price and worked backward, in front of the finest strategic minds of the Tang, and they could all follow the logic, and none of them had thought to. Li Jing's eyes went sharp. Plong Kong, who'd just scolded me, immediately reversed himself and urged the emperor to send scouts north before committing a single soldier. The emperor did. 10 days later, the express courier came back. I watched him hand over the report while the emperor and a dozen of the empire's most powerful men crowded around, having not slept properly in 10 days out of sheer curiosity. And the report said, exactly as the imperial grandson predicted. Right after the plea for help arrived, an unprecedented blizzard, the worst in decades, descended on the Turkic lands. Countless cattle and sheep frozen dead. Marching an army in would have been suicide. Ding, blue chest. The whole room just looked at me. Gao Yong said, out loud, that he wanted to go home and beat his own useless grandson. And my grandfather, I watched it happen, stopped seeing me as a clever pet that afternoon. He started seeing me as an asset, a strategist. Because his crown prince, my father, was half-crippled and unfit. His other sons were arrogant, or hypocritical, or timid, and here was a 6-year-old who just outthought his entire war council and saved him an army. A seed of a thought took root in his head that day, and it would grow all year, and it would end with a crown. But first, the blizzard he'd predicted for the Turks came for us too. It rolled down out of the north and buried the Haedong region under killing snow, collapsed houses, frozen fields, refugees streaming toward the capital by the tens of thousands, starving and freezing on the roads. And the way I handled that famine is the day the entire court stopped laughing at me and started, quietly, to be a little afraid. The famine started as a fundraising problem, and I solved that one with a card trick. The court needed relief money and the treasury was thin, so when Pops got gloomy about it over roasted sweet potatoes, I pitched him 2 ideas. 1. Carve the names of donors into stone monuments, merits recorded for posterity, and watch the capital's rich men trip over each other to buy immortality. 2. And this one made him put his pen down. A charity auction. Put up items from the royal collection. Let the merchants bid against each other. Donate every coin. The royal family gains fame and raises a fortune. The merchants gain reputation and a chance to curry favor with nobility. And nobody has to be strong-armed into donating. Win all around. He rushed off, pitched it to his ministers as his own idea, watched them praise it, and then revealed it was mine, and enjoyed their stunned faces enormously. The auction raised nearly 200,000 strings. My own calligraphy sold for 80,000 of that. Bought, I should mention, by my own Long Chang firm, because I am not a man who leaves money on the table, even when I'm the one giving it away. The grain went north, and then it got stolen. Corrupt officials in Haedong took the relief grain, the grain the whole capital had scraped together, and quietly resold it. My grandfather found out, and it made him physically ill, genuinely. Rage damaged his liver, cold got into his lungs, and the Emperor of the Tang collapsed, unconscious, and the whole court crowded into Ganlu Hall around his sickbed, while the imperial physicians fussed. I heard, and I sprinted over, and I did what any devoted grandson does. I burst in wailing at the top of my lungs. Imperial Pops, you can't leave. How will I live without you? A full theatrical funeral dirge, which snapped him upright in bed because you'd think from the volume that he was already dead. Ding, blue chest. Then I grabbed his wrist, took his pulse, because a chest had given me master-level medicine by then, sighed in relief, and announced, Imperial Pops, you're not dead. I thought you were going to die. Ding. And when he assured me he was fine, I looked genuinely put out, because I'd howled the whole way over, and it seemed a waste. And I offered to practice the wailing some more since I'd started my tune a bit too high, so it'd be ready for when he actually died. He was, at this point, near tears, and not from illness. Fat Uncle Jiao Min, at the bedside, tried to score a point off my so-called medical skill. How could a child understand medicine? Be humble. Don't look down on the physicians who've studied for decades. So I looked at him and diagnosed him, out loud, in front of the court. I told him his fat pallor and puffy face and the dark bags under his eyes weren't health. They were spleen and stomach deficiency, phlegm damp blocking his qi, and, I put this delicately, a severe kidney deficiency, which meant that if he didn't take better care of himself, his performance in the bedroom was going to become a real problem, possibly a permanent one. I offered to call the imperial physicians back to confirm. He declined, at volume, his face the color of a boiled crab. That's the second time I want you to notice the pattern. He steps toward me, I turn him around, and he ends up more humiliated than before, in front of everyone who matters. Every time. But the real event, the day the court stopped seeing me as a novelty, was the brand. The refugees flooded Guangzhong and the capital by the tens of thousands, thousands more every day, and my father, whom the emperor had put in charge of resettling them, was drowning. The relief grain leaked through corrupt hands. Fake refugees, well-fed freeloaders, crowded out the real ones at the porridge lines. It was a disaster inside a disaster. So I told him to watch and learn, and I took over through Long Chang firm, and I refused to donate a single coin. Instead, I went to my headquarters, where I had 10,000 strings free and 3,000 shi of rice, and rice at famine prices bought maybe 20,000 shi, nowhere near enough for hundreds of thousands of mouths. So I didn't buy rice, I bought bran, livestock feed, 8 pounds of it for the price of 1 pound of rice, 160,000 shi of it, and I swapped my 3,000 shi of rice for another 24,000 shi of bran on top. My manager stared at me. Feng Lan, watching, tried gently to remind me that bran was pig feed, not fit for human beings, in case I'd simply never learned that. And I told her the thing I meant, the thing that this whole part of the story is about. 20,000 shi of rice runs out. 180,000 shi of bran keeps hundreds of thousands of people alive long enough for the court to catch up. Bran is for livestock? Only those who survive count as human. This is the only option. I'll bear the blame. We set up free porridge stations across the capital. Bran porridge, gray, gritty, sand and grass floating in it, genuinely worse than what you'd feed a dog. And you know what happened? The freeloaders took one look, one whiff, and left. The well-dressed opportunists gagged and stormed off cursing us, and the real refugees, the ones who'd walked 1,000 miles and would die without it, stayed and lined up and ate and lived. Because the gritty, ugly, unwanted thing was the one thing that actually reached the people who needed it. The good stuff never reaches the bottom. Only the unwanted stuff gets there. Fenglan worked it out watching from the carriage, and she looked at me differently after that. Naturally, Zhao Min found out, and naturally he saw a weapon. He rounded up his stooge and marched to Ganlu Hall to impeach me, and by ugly coincidence, Huang Kong and half the senior court had already come for the same reason, genuinely troubled that the crown prince and the imperial grandson were feeding starving refugees animal feed right under the emperor's nose, a scandal that could ruin the royal name and spark a riot. So I got summoned into a tribunal, my grandfather sick and grim on the couch, my father sweating and ready to take the blame to protect me, Huang Kong righteous, and Zhao Min delighted, delivering a whole soaring speech. The refugees are flesh and blood, human beings who came begging for mercy, and this callous child fed them pig slop to buy himself a cheap reputation, chilling the hearts of hundreds of thousands, shaming the dynasty, risking a rebellion. Please, father, punish him severely, or it's an offense against heaven itself. He was, on the surface, winning. He had the moral high ground and he knew it, so I let him finish. And then I asked him one question. Fourth uncle, you keep talking about the good of the nation. Do you know how many refugees there are? How much food they need every single day? He didn't. Of course he didn't. He'd never left his warm mansion. He stammered, how would I know? There's no way to count them. Fourth uncle doesn't know, I said, but I do. More than 26,000 have reached the capital, growing by thousands a day, and hundreds of thousands more are pouring into Guangzhou. So let me ask, with your heart so full of the whole world, do you have a way, any way, to get these starving, freezing people through the last cold month of winter? He said he could donate some money. In the end, I said, there's nothing you can do. And then I laid it out, my childish voice ringing off the walls of Ganlu Hall. 10,000 strings, 3,000 shi of grain, all of it turned to 184,000 shi of bran. Rice porridge would feed less than 20,000, a drop against a flood. So what if bran is for livestock? Whether it's food for people or food for animals, as long as it keeps hundreds of thousands of human beings alive through the winter, it is good food. And more than that, plain rice porridge draws every greedy opportunist to steal the refugees' share, but bran drives them off, so all of it reaches the people who are actually dying. And more than that, corrupt officials will risk their necks to embezzle rice, but nobody's going to risk anything to steal low-value bran, so bran sent to the disaster zone actually arrives. 3 problems, 1 ugly gray solution. Fourth uncle sits in his warm pavilion, I finished, in his sable coat, eating delicacies of land and sea, having never once gone out to see the disaster with his own eyes, and offers his opinions on disaster relief. Those who imagine they hold the world in their hearts, but only offer empty talk and grand ambitions, harm the country. I am young, but I know that the rise and fall of the nation is the responsibility of every person in it, let alone a member of the royal family, who should carry the people in his heart. What right do you have to lecture me? The hall was silent. You could hear Zhao Min breathing. His fists were white, his face was red, his eyes were bloodshot, and he could not find a single flaw in what I'd said, because there wasn't one. My father, who'd been swaying on the edge of fainting, straightened his back and looked ready to weep with pride. And Huang Kong, incorruptible, rigid Huang Kong, who'd come to condemn me, stepped forward and bowed and apologized and called it the most enlightening lesson an old official had received in decades. He bowed to a 6-year-old, twice. My grandfather, weak on his couch, looked at Zhao Min for a long, cold moment, with an expression I'd never seen him turn on his favorite son. Disappointment, the real kind. And then he looked at me, and his voice was gentler than I'd ever heard it. Grandson, well done. And then I picked his pocket one more time, because I have a condition. When he tried to promise he'd repay Longchang firm for the fortune I'd spent, I stopped him. Pops, is the Tang dynasty yours? Of course, he said. And are you and I the same? Of course. Then when you die, doesn't the whole Tang dynasty become mine anyway? So if you repay me, aren't you just getting something for nothing? He sat there, sick and exhausted, working out that this made a horrifying kind of sense. so he agreed not to repay me, and then, because he wanted to give me something, mused that maybe some land down in Jiangnan was going unused, at which point I dropped the whole selfless act instantly and demanded to know exactly how big the parcel was, and reminded him a king's word is his bond, and he couldn't take it back now. A month later, Hedong stabilized. The brand had bought the court exactly the time it needed. Longcheng firm got a plaque, in the emperor's own hand, for the country and the people, and a grant of land in Jiangnan, and we bloomed across the south. And even without saying my name, that plaque on a shop door made grown merchants go quiet. I was 7 years old, roughly, and I had just talked a room full of the most powerful men in Asia into agreeing that a 6-year-old had a better grasp of governing a starving province than any of them. Huang Kong went home that night, I later learned, and started seriously considering whether he should resign as my father's tutor and become mine instead. The favor wasn't just on my side of the room anymore. It had my name carved on it. I should pause here and check in on my underlings, because they were having a year too, mostly at their own expense. When the schools reopened after the famine, none of the 4 had done the holiday homework, on the reasonable grounds that I hadn't done mine. So Teacher Joe hauled us up front, and where the others sniveled and made excuses, I gave a speech. I told him that no amount of homework equals real practice, that I'd spent my holiday relieving the disaster in Hedong, working day and night, rising early and retiring late, until tens of thousands of people had enough to eat to survive the winter, that I wrote my lessons on the land and answered the questions of the people, that I dared not disrespect the classics, but I would rather fail one assignment than let the livelihoods of the people go to ruin. Teacher Joe and every scholar in the room stood there thunderstruck, establishing merit, one of the 3 immortal achievements, casually claimed by a child, and gave me the highest grade in the school for the homework I did not do. Then he made my 4 friends copy the assignment 100 times. Gao Tian, in particular, had elevated flattery to an art form. His signature line, deployed roughly hourly, was that his admiration for me was like a surging river, never ending. He also fancied himself a historian. He'd gather crowds to recount unofficial histories so deranged, Hua Tuo doing surgery on Guan Yu out of guilt, Cao Cao and Liu Bei getting up to things no chronicle records, that I had to physically stop him before he started a war with the classics. When I suggested he tell those stories to his grandfather, old Gao Yang, he gasped that I was sharp-eyed and discerning, because his grandfather had in fact beaten him for exactly that. His faith in me was total and completely unearned, and I found it deeply relaxing. The best of it was that these 4 were my early warning system for court gossip, because their grandfathers ran the empire. That's how I learned old Gao Yang had secretly bought a jar of the crayfish virility wine and been mortified when the whole court found out. The culprit, of course, was Gao Tian, who'd told, in his own words, only my mother, my father, my eldest brother, second brother, eldest sister, second sister, third sister, the steward, my great-uncle, and a few friends. The boy's a wide-mouthed bottle. I love him. He would follow me into a volcano and narrate it badly the whole way down. The next time I stopped a war, I did it with a chessboard, and I nearly enjoyed it too much. There was a steppe tribe, the Xuan Tuo, whose Khan wanted to marry a Tang princess. Pops had half promised it a year back and now regretted it. His advisors warned that marrying them would legitimize the Khan as overlord of the grasslands and create a monster in the north. But you can't just refuse a marriage alliance you've already dangled. The whole world is watching, and the Celestial Empire can't be seen going back on its word. The court had argued about it for months with no clean way out. He explained all this to me while teaching me to read memorials, and I solved it between bites. Didn't they want to propose? Then there should be a bride price. We're the bride's family. It's not unreasonable to ask this barbarian son-in-law for a proper dowry. Ask for an impossible one. 10,000 horses, 100,000 cattle, 200,000 sheep. They're nomads. Livestock is their whole wealth. If they somehow gather it, they've bled themselves white to do it, and we learn exactly how strong they really are and can plan accordingly. If they can't, we refuse. Perfectly justified, no face lost. The Celestial Empire simply values its daughters, and the Khan is humiliated in front of every tribe that was thinking of following him, and the grasslands splinter, and he's too busy putting down revolts to ever threaten us. Marry my daughter. Send the money. If you can't, get out. My grandfather stared at me. You thought I was on the 3rd floor, I told him. Grandson is on the 5th. He presented it to court as his own. Pitt watched the generals cheer, watched the strategist praise the ruthlessness of it, and then revealed whose idea it was, and got to enjoy his ministers being stunned by a 6-year-old for the 2nd time in a season. The first time it worked exactly as designed. The Khan's own uncle came bearing the marriage proposal, got handed the bride price, 10,000 horses, 100,000 cattle, 200,000 sheep, and left looking like a man who'd swallowed a stone, and the Shu Yantuo went quiet for a good long while. Problem solved. Or so I thought. Then they sent a second envoy, and this one wouldn't take the dowry bait at all. Instead, he invoked precedent, the famous story of how Tibet's Songtsen Gampo won a Tang princess by passing the emperor's 6 trials of wisdom and humbly preloaded gifts, and demanded to be tested by wit rather than wealth, putting my grandfather in a corner. And this envoy was sharp. Pops threw riddles and mechanical puzzles at him for 3 days, and he solved every one, like a second coming of the Tibetan minister who'd cracked the 6 trials. I heard about it playing chess with Feng Lan, and I told her the emperor was being an idiot. Don't play riddles with a riddle master. Test him with mathematics. Math isn't like riddles or classics. You either know it or you don't, and a clever tongue is worthless. And the problem I had in mind used the chessboard right in front of me. 1 coin on the first square, 2 on the second, 4 on the third, doubling square after square across all 324 squares of a Go board. Either the envoy calculates the total in the time it takes an incense stick to burn, or Shu Yan Tuo simply pays that many coins as the bride price. Wit or wealth, we give him both options. If he can't manage either, he lacks both. And how is that our fault? Feng Lan laughed at me. It's a small board. How much could it possibly cost? So she picked up a brush and started calculating, confident, and I watched her smile curdle around the 21st square when the number blew past 1 million and freeze entirely at the 25th when it passed 16 million. She'd done maybe 8% of the board. Then my grandfather, who, it turned out, had been eavesdropping behind the screen the whole time, the open and above-board spy, came out and tried it himself, and he made it to the 41st square, past 1 trillion, and gave up with a number that no counting system in the Tang dynasty could even name, because the final answer isn't a big number. It's a number larger than all the coins that have ever existed, larger than the Tang and Shu Yan Tuo combined could pay if you sold every stone and every soul in both. It's a number you can only write with a notation I'd have to invent. The next day, the emperor set the envoy that exact problem, framed it as the easy final test, and watched his ministers panic that he was letting Shu Yan Tuo off cheap. The envoy started calculating, smiling. He'd only been sitting a moment, and he was already 15 squares in, easy points. Then the doubling caught him. I wasn't there, but I've heard it described enough times to see it. The sweat starting around the 20th square. The smile freezing at the 30th, when it crossed 500 million. The horror around the 40th, when he ran out of numerals and understood, the way you understand a cliff, that this thing was bottomless. He fought it for an hour, pale and shaking, and then he laid down his brush and conceded. He could neither pay the sum nor calculate it, not if you gave him a month. Marriage refused. No face lost. And when the emperor revealed the problem was set by his 6-year-old grandson, who had also calculated the true final answer, using a notation he'd invented himself, the envoy sat there with his mouth open, stumped by a child. No, humiliated, along with every counting system of the age, by a child. He bowed so low his forehead nearly touched the floor, and said he was completely convinced. I published a little book after that, Lee's Numerals and Scientific Notation, printed cheap and spread through the capital. Ordinary people didn't care, but the mathematics scholars of the Imperial Academy and their chancellor Lin Guangming read it and lost their composure, because a 6-year-old had just reformed the entire mathematics of the Tang dynasty. In the Confucian tradition, there are 3 immortal achievements: establishing merit, establishing virtue, establishing words. I'd just done the 3rd one, before I could reliably tie my own shoes. Then Hongwen Academy burned down. A stray dog knocked over a candle, and the Academy's collection, nearly 10,000 hand-copied volumes, the treasure my grandfather had assembled with the full power of the throne, went up in a night. In an age where copying a single book flawlessly took a skilled scribe weeks or months, this was a catastrophe. The emperor wanted to tear the surviving scholars apart, and my 4 underlings, who'd been punished with an all-night copying assignment, were secretly overjoyed because the school was rubble and there'd be no classes, right up until they learned their all-night copying had also burned and had to do it again. But I was already in my courtyard, building the answer because the fire was a setup for the payoff and I'd smelled it coming. My grandfather caught me at it, muttering threats at a stack of clay while I worked, and asked what I was doing. I'd invented movable type. Not the woodblock printing they already had, where one carved page is one page forever and a single mistake ruins the block. Individual clay characters, carved in relief, set into a wax and resin bed, inked, pressed. I showed him, printed a passage of the Analects, crisp and clean and flawless. Then I heated the plate, and the characters came loose, and I reset them into a completely different passage from the records of the Grand Historian, and printed that. The same characters, reused, forever. A single day's work by a few skilled hands could print hundreds of books. He observed instantly what he was holding, and his eyes caught fire. He hauled his most powerful ministers, the Fox-Duke Chen Hao-Yuan, the chancellors, down onto the floor of Ganlu Hall to help him set type like servants, bellies in the air, digging for the character mountain, while I stood off to the side, wishing desperately for a camera. And when they worked out what the reusable clay was, and worked out that it was mine, they looked at me the way you look at a comet. Yang Wen, who never flattered anyone, bowed and said my talent surpassed the ancient prodigy who became prime minister at 12. The library would not just be rebuilt, it would be printed and multiplied until the Tang King's collection surpassed every collection on Earth. The fire had been the setup. This was the payoff. My reward request, when the Emperor pressed me, was to borrow his personal jade seal to crack walnuts, which I then did, on his head. Ding! I contain multitudes. Now I have to tell you about the night my grandfather and I became sworn brothers, because it's the single most undignified thing I ever did to him, and I did it on purpose. My ninth uncle, Prince Jin, Shaolei, the timid, indecisive one, who in the history I knew would eventually become emperor himself, got married. Big wedding banquet, and I goaded my grandfather into a drinking contest. Toast after toast, each one a new excuse. Your son's getting married, your ninth brother's getting married, your grandmother's son's getting married. Come on, one more, until the heavenly Khan, who was pushing 50 and had already been drinking with his old generals, was thoroughly, magnificently drunk, and in that state, glowing and expansive and sentimental. When I proposed we become sworn brothers, he slammed the table and roared, "Great idea!" The princes went white, because if the emperor is my sworn brother, then I am the crown prince's uncle, which makes every prince at that table my nephew. My father tried to intervene, and the emperor snapped at him not to disturb him while he was drinking with his brother. Fat Uncle Zhao Min was forced to raise his cup and toast me, his second uncle, grinding out the words with a face like a slapped ghost, before faking a faint and toppling backward off his chair to escape the situation entirely. And I kept pouring, kept toasting, until the Emperor of the Tang put his arm around my shoulders, told me that life was really something, brother, and passed out face first on the table. The next morning he woke up with a splitting headache and no memory. And I, thoughtful grandson, had sent over a gift to help him remember, a little comic strip I'd drawn, documenting the whole evening, the Emperor's drunkenness. He flipped through it, charmed. Nice art. Is this me? A solo portrait. How bold. Until he hit the panel where he swore brotherhood with a 6-year-old in front of every prince in the realm, and it all came back, and he nearly fainted. Ding. Purple chest. His mortification was, apparently, worth a purple chest. He tried to lock himself in Ganlu Hall to avoid me. I knocked on the door and cheerfully announced through it that I was his father's second uncle. Ding. And when he finally, reluctantly opened it and tried to disown the whole sworn brotherhood as a drunk joke, I reminded him that a king's word is his bond, and he had nothing. So he fell back on the only weapon he had left against me, which was guilt, and I turned that around too, when all wounded and lonely, the poor neglected child who only has eunuchs and maids for company, and watched him crumble into apologizing to me. Ding ding, even his guilt paid out. That's the machine. That's the whole year, distilled. The most dangerous man alive, and I had him coming and going, and every single mood swing dropped coins into my pocket. 2 smaller crimes belong here because they're the ones I'm least proud of and enjoy the most. First, the durian. A chest had given me one, the spiky fruit that smells, to the uninitiated, exactly like a sewage accident, and I couldn't resist feeding it to my grandfather. I told him I had a special fruit with a unique flavor, asked if he minded, and he waved me off grandly. What garbage hadn't he eaten on campaign? Don't baby your grandfather. So I split it open. The stench rolled out, and he staggered back, gagging, demanding to know why my fruit had feces in it. Then, because I looked so earnest and hurt, and because a Lee man doesn't disappoint his filial grandson, he steeled himself, jammed a piece in his mouth, and his eyes went wide, because it's actually delicious, and he devoured the rest, praising it with his mouth full. At which precise moment my father walked in, the emperor tried to swallow a giant wad of it to look dignified, choked, went purple, and I had to run up, yell a battle cry, and punch the emperor of the Tang in the stomach to dislodge it, which sent a spray of chewed durian pulp directly onto my father's face. My father took one whiff, concluded his father had a mouthful of excrement, and collapsed, vomiting. Ding! It was a good afternoon. Second, my ninth uncle's wedding, which I sabotaged on purpose, because a chest had given me a one-time historical mission card. Influence a famous historical figure inside 30 minutes, collect a reward. Ninth Uncle Shaolei and his brand new bride, the Lady Wong of a great clan, qualified. So I helpfully told the bride, on her wedding day, some invented tales of Ninth Uncle's fondness for the pleasure quarter. Her smile went glacial. The couple fought, she stormed off, and Ninth Uncle begged me to mediate. Big mistake. I shuttled between them as the innocent go-between, faithfully mistranslating every conciliatory thing each of them said into a fresh insult, until the Lady Wang came flying out of her chamber to physically fight him. Card complete. The rewards were excellent. A fruit that permanently added a pound of strength a day, 50 outlaw steel knives, a sea salt method, and a go board that had once belonged to Emperor Jing of Han, which the system helpfully noted was a documented murder weapon, guaranteed lethal as a headshot. I keep it on my table. Ninth Uncle, who came to my rooms to yell at me afterward, nearly brained himself on it face first. I moved it further back on the table. Family safety first. But the coins were becoming beside the point, because somewhere in there, without either of us saying it, the con had finished turning into the real thing. I wasn't farming a boss anymore. I was spending time with my grandfather. And he, lonely, aging, watching the future for a successor worth the throne, had stopped seeing a clever tool and started seeing the one descendant who felt like family. He was about to do something about that. But first, one more scam had to run its course. The ugliest one. The one that wasn't mine. While all this was going on, a foreign merchant was quietly building a bomb under the capital, and my fat uncle was standing on top of it, grinning. The merchant sold a medicinal wine made from crayfish, a little freshwater creature nobody in the Tang had bothered to eat, marketed as a virility tonic, which is how half the old generals in court ended up embarrassed, my grandfather included, after I tricked him into a bowl of the stuff. But the wine was just the fig leaf. The real product was a scheme. Pay a 10-string deposit, farm some crayfish for 3 months, and get double your money back, deposit returned plus an equal sum in interest. Feed them cheap bran, 3 months later, hand over your grown crayfish, collect 20 strings, walk away 30 richer than a year of farming. And it worked. The first batch got paid out in full in public, which meant the whole capital watched people get rich off nothing, and the fear evaporated and the greed took over. A rice shop worker named Ma Lei quit his job and talked his parents into mortgaging their house and their coffin savings to buy in. Everyone bought in. Fat Uncle Zhao Min bought in, became the merchant's protector for a 30% cut, lent him his name and his reputation, and raked in 40,000 strings a month, and started dreaming of seizing the whole operation for himself. His reputation soared. The man who lifts the common people out of poverty. I heard about it and got a cold, familiar feeling in my stomach because I'd seen this exact machine before, in another life. There is no honest way to earn 100% return. Businessmen sell you 9/10 profit for 1/10 cost. They do not hand it to you for free. The crayfish were a gimmick. The wine was a gimmick. The real business was the deposits, hundreds of thousands, millions of strings, piling up in one man's vault. Pay the early ones with the later ones' money, let greed do the rest, and then, one day, vanish, robbing Peter to pay Paul. It was never going to last. It was designed not to, but I didn't say a word. Because if you stand up while everyone's getting rich and shout, "It's a scam," you don't become the hero. You become the enemy trying to steal their fortune, and the mob drowns you in spit. So I just had people watch the merchant, and I waited, and I told my father, who was floundering again, to sit tight and let the greedy dig their own graves. Meanwhile, my grandfather wanted to take me on an incognito trip. He wanted to see the recovery with his own eyes, not through the flattering fog of memorials, a wise instinct. So we disguised ourselves as a merchant grandfather and grandson, put 4 absurdly named elite guards on a long leash behind us, and walked into the poor wards of the capital. I will spare you most of the comedy, not all of it. You need to know what the Emperor of the Tang and his designated heir got up to in disguise. He stepped in dog excrement almost immediately. Then, rather than let a guard buy him new shoes, the heavenly Khan has his pride, he decided to wipe his foot in a patch of tall grass and, while he was at it, teach me to forage wild vegetables the way he had as a young soldier. He waded in. He brushed the grass aside, and he came face to face with a man squatting there, pants down, mid-business. They both screamed. The Emperor of the Tang and a defecating commoner shrieking at each other in the weeds. His counter-surveillance instincts, I told him, were truly world-class. But that's exactly why the trip mattered. The poor wards had no sanitation, people relieving themselves wherever there was cover, and I told him plainly that the first hot summer would cook that into a plague and march it straight through the whole capital, palace included. So I gave him the fix. Public latrines, built by the court, somewhere for people to actually go. And the waste gets collected and sold to farmers as fertilizer, which pays for most of the construction. He took it to the Ministry of Works, and crews started going up across all 108 wards, and his ministers marveled that a child had spotted a hidden threat to the whole city and solved it with a plan that funded itself. Add sanitation reform to the resume. On that same walk, we passed the crayfish queues and heard old farmers cheerfully abandoning their fields for the scheme. I risked one careful, "What if it's a scam?" to a stranger and got shooed off like an idiot for insulting a sure thing. My grandfather felt uneasy about it too, but I steered him off. Fourth uncle's the guarantor, I reminded him, and fourth uncle isn't stupid. Would he let himself be fooled? Let it run, let it finish. I wanted it to finish. I just didn't tell him that part. Then he came to my farm, and I finally proved the sweet potato. The Minister of Agriculture came along, a man named Xiao Fan, who'd risen from the fields and could tell soil fertility by tasting it, which he did, crouching at the edge of my land, rubbing dirt between his fingers, putting it on his tongue. He came up stunned. My fields were the most fertile he'd ever touched. Modern composting will do that. My grandfather, not to be outdone, copied him and tasted a handful too, and got a mouthful of chicken manure that I'd neglected to mention was mixed in, and spent the next while gagging while I helpfully asked how it tasted. Ding. And then they dug up the sweet potatoes. A single moo yielded 1,181 caddies, in a world where a good field gave 200 or 300. The Minister of Agriculture stood there with glazed eyes. The Emperor stood there like he was dreaming. A famine-proof crop, storable as powder or dried, that could keep the poor alive through any winter the sky threw at them. He announced it to a skeptical court, who cried impossible until they rode out and saw the mountain of it with their own eyes and fell silent. The Fox Duke Chen Haoyuan proposed they name it the Kirin fruit, after the auspicious beast, in my honor. Farmers across Guangzhou would soon be worshipping the strange root, and, by extension, the boy in the palace who'd found it, as a gift from an immortal. I had given the Tang Dynasty forensic sketching, a perfume empire, disaster economics, a diplomatic victory, industry, movable type printing, reformed mathematics, public sanitation, and a crop that ended famines. I was, by the most generous reckoning, 7 years old. And then the bomb the foreign merchant had built finally went off, and I was standing exactly where I needed to be to catch it. I knew the day he'd run. I'd worked out his pattern. He'd flee within 3 days of a payout when a short disappearance wouldn't raise alarm because a merchant that cautious wouldn't wait a day longer than he had to with 1,000,000+ strings of stolen deposits in hand. So on that day, my guards were on the North Road. His carriage rolled toward the gate with his treasure and his freedom. They stopped it and hauled him back. I put him in a cell and had him tell me exactly where he'd hidden the money because a sum that size can't be carried. It has to be buried and sunk and stashed in batches to be quietly retrieved after the storm. Feng Lan, who'd watched me predict all of it, asked why I hadn't warned anyone, and I told her, cutting off someone's livelihood is like killing their parents. Stand up too early and the victims tear you apart as the villain. We're adults, I said. We answer for our own choices. Then I grinned. But I'm not an adult, so I don't have to answer for mine. 3 days later, on the day the second batch of deposits came due, the swindler's shops stayed shut. The vault was empty. He was gone. In the capital, which had reinvested everything and recruited their whole families, the rice shop worker Ma Lei had leveraged into 6 contracts by buying poor men's identities, betting his family's entire future, discovered all at once that they'd been robbed. Riots across the 108 wards, 16 dead in a stampede at the West Market, 200,000 people, 1.6 million strings, gone. And the man whose name had guaranteed every coin of it was my fat uncle Zhao Min. Here's the part the universe apparently arranged for its own amusement. It all came to a head at my grandfather's birthday banquet, the same event where this whole story started, where I stole a chicken leg and cursed him in verse, and first learned I could rob this man of anything, including his composure. A full year, a perfect circle. Zhao Min didn't know the bomb had gone off yet, so he stood up at that banquet, chest out, and presented father with his gift. Not an object, he said grandly, but something greater. A list, 200,000 names. The people of Guangzhong who'd been lifted out of poverty by the crayfish scheme he had personally sponsored. He read out villages, statistics, the whole thing, and made sure to note that he did it not for petty merchant profit, a little dig at my Longchang firm, but out of pure care for the people, leading them to prosperity. The wise and benevolent prince, at last with a real achievement to his name. My grandfather was pleased, called it the best gift of the day. And I sat there and yawned and told him what a marvel it was that a man as fat and bloated as fourth uncle could contain such wisdom. And then I asked him, sweetly, whether the rebate scheme was actually his idea or whether he was just taking credit for someone else's. I gave him a chance. I really did. He waved it off, vague, implying the credit was mostly his. That's when the doors banged open and the governor of the capital region strode in, mud on his boots, and reported civil unrest in all 108 wards, tens of thousands storming shops with worthless contracts, 16 dead in a stampede, the main vault emptied, the foreign merchant absconded with the deposits, 1.6 million strings, 200,000 victims, the worst fraud in the history of the dynasty, rooted in the crayfish scheme. The hall erupted, and every eye in it turned to fat Uncle Zhao Min, who had just finished bragging about being that scheme's sponsor, and whose face was draining from red to gray to a color that doesn't have a name. He collapsed to his knees. He disavowed everything. He'd only lent his reputation. He was a victim too, deceived by the merchant's honeyed words. If he'd known, he'd have dragged the man before the throne in chains himself. My father and Uncle Zhao Wen had to bite the insides of their cheeks to keep from laughing. My grandfather stripped his crayfish shares on the spot and ordered his mansion investigated, cold as winter, looking at his once favorite son like he was seeing him clearly for the first time. And then I spoke up. Imperial Pops, I also have an unusual gift for you today. He was in no mood. What gift? How about I give you the swindler? The whole room stopped. My father lunged to shush me. Don't cause trouble. The merchant's vanished. Even the court can't find him. But I'd said it twice by then, which meant it wasn't a joke. Fourth uncle gave you the list of victims, I said. I'll give you the list of perpetrators. It's a perfect match between uncle and nephew. I told them I'd caught the merchant 3 days ago on the North Road, had him in a cell, had already extracted where the 1.6 million was buried and sunk and stashed. And then I explained the whole machine, the impossible 100% return that could only be robbing Peter to pay Paul, the first payout that baited the greed, the flight the moment the deposit pool got fat enough. I laid it all bare, so simply that a room full of the Empire's sharpest minds sat there stunned. A child had seen through in advance what they hadn't seen at all. I asked one thing in return, that the case be publicized across the whole Tang, so that the next swindler who tried this in some far province would find a population already inoculated against him. And my grandfather turned on Zhao Min, and for the first time in the whole year he didn't temper it, didn't soften it, didn't protect his son. His voice shook the hall. Wei saw the treachery before it acted, caught the mastermind, recovered the money, averted a catastrophe that could have shaken the dynasty to its roots. And what did you do? You colluded with a fraud, you shilled for him, and after it blew up you had the gall to question the child who saved us all? a prince of the Tang who exists to share the nation's burden and seek the people's happiness, instead competing with them for profit and plunging them into ruin. He called it a disgrace to the imperial family. He ordered Zhao Min out to reflect behind closed doors, which, in the language of that court, was the sound of a favored son's ambitions dying. Zhao Min swayed and stumbled and went down and got up and left. I almost felt something. Then I remembered the snowman and the shit tonic and the bran and all the times he tried to bury me, and I didn't. You should have seen the moment the news reached the ruined. Thousands of them had been camped outside the yamen for days, old men, teenagers, women with their hair still done up, silent, hollow, past hoping, staying only because they couldn't bring themselves to go home and face their families. And then the governor came out and told them the swindler was caught, the money recovered, the refunds starting in 3 days by the emperor's own decree. For one breath, nothing. Then the whole square broke. Men who'd staked their parents' burial money and their wives' dowries and their children's futures went down on their knees in the dust, sobbing, kowtowing toward the palace, clutching worthless contracts that had just become worth everything again. One young man who'd been the loudest doubter opened his mouth to cheer and couldn't make a sound, just folded forward onto the cold stone and shook. This money was nothing to a rich man, not one good meal. To them, it was their whole lives, lost and handed back. Long live the emperor, they screamed, and blessings on the imperial grandson, 1,000 voices at once until you could hear it from the palace walls. And the money mattered, but the lesson mattered more, and my grandfather wasn't done teaching it, because when the refunds actually started, we went out incognito again to watch them land. And what we found was corrupt clerks turning the refund into a second robbery, demanding impossible verification, household documents, village head guarantees that cost bribes, and this is the one that got me, insisting that a dead man appear in person to collect on his own contract. A son carried his father's corpse to the yamen gate to prove he was dead, and they left the body in the sun all afternoon and sent them home empty-handed. I was standing there, disguised, when a clerk shoved an old widow away. Her son had drowned himself over this scam, she couldn't produce him, and she and her grandson would lose their house. So I called the clerk a scoundrel, out loud, in front of the crowd. And the clerk, drunk on his little scrap of power, decided to arrest the mouthy child and his grandfather as fraud accomplices, and, because my grandfather, playing along, admitted there was, indeed, some connection between us and the Xing Shang scheme, ordered his men to seize us. So I triggered the reveal. I stepped in front of my grandfather, not behind him, and I shouted, "Emperor armor combination!" He had no idea what was happening, but the 4 guards did. They leapt in, unfurled a dragon robe between them, sun and moon on the shoulders, mountains on the back, the full imperial regalia, and while the clerk gaped, I scrambled up onto my grandfather's back, jammed a crown onto his head, and announced to the entire courtyard, "The Emperor of Great Tang is here!" How dare you inferiors defy your superiors? You have never seen a crowd kneel so fast. Nobody, however bold, impersonates the emperor in the street. The clerk understood, in the space of one breath, that he was a dead man. My grandfather, who'd finally caught up with the plan, and was, I could feel it through his robe, secretly delighted to be assembled like a hero out of a children's story, thundered that he had proclaimed to the world the return of the people's money, and here were parasites skinning them alive over it, and he had the clerk's teeth knocked out and dragged to death row on the spot. Then the local prefect galloped up, realized who he was groveling before, and got stripped and jailed too, and the whole rotten office purged. From now on, the emperor decreed, a contract alone gets your money back, and let's see who dares stop the people of the Tang from reclaiming their lives. The crowd wept and cheered, and from up on his back, I asked my grandfather how it felt to show off. He told me to get down and stop calling him old. It was, I think, the happiest I ever saw him, the god of war and his grandson, assembled into one ridiculous, heroic unit, delivering justice to a mob of grateful people. That's the note the year had been building to. And then, a few days later, he made it official. I thought he was going to reward me for the scam, money, land, the usual. Instead, he picked up a bright yellow scroll and told me to listen carefully, because this was not a casual decree, not something scribbled and stamped. This was an edict drafted by the Secretariat, reviewed by the Chancellery, passed up through all 3 departments of state, the kind of document reserved for decisions that reshape the throne itself. He read it aloud. The classical language ran long, but I'll give you the spine of it. Imperial grandson Xiao Wei, born of pure and noble lineage, possessed of the wisdom of an emperor, whose intelligence in childhood illuminates the unfathomable, whose strategies rival creation, strong of body, extraordinary of talent, in accordance with the will of heaven and the sentiment of the people, is hereby confirmed and installed in his proper position, to solidify the foundation of the state. He was making me the heir, not my father's heir, His, skipping a generation, over a table of grown sons, past the whole exhausting war of succession, straight down to me. He pressed his jade seal into the wax, and a draft became law, and the Ministry of Rights began preparing a grand investiture. And I sat there, feeling something I hadn't felt since the sun tried to murder me through that window a year before. My fate had changed. Because you have to understand what this scroll actually was, under the flattery. When I woke up in this body, I was a dead boy walking. My father was going to rebel inside a year, fail, and drag me down with him into exile and an early grave. That was the timeline. That was the whole reason I'd spent a year turning the most dangerous man in the world into a slot machine and a grandfather. And now, with one stamp of a seal, I wasn't the doomed son of a doomed rebel anymore. I was the imperial grandson of the Tang dynasty, the designated next emperor. As long as my father didn't do anything catastrophically stupid, and I now had every reason and every resource to make sure he didn't, the executioner's timeline was dead. I changed my fate. That year, all of it, the chicken and the poems and the bran and the chessboard and the snow, it had all been for this one scroll. The emperor asked how I felt. I told him to address me, going forward, as imperial grandson. Ding, blue chest. He couldn't help laughing. Got into the role fast, didn't he? That's my grandson. The reactions told me everything about the road ahead. Fat Uncle Zhao Min, already ruined by the scam, got the news and nearly stopped breathing. This world will belong to that brat now, he raged. And then, listing my achievements out loud to prove how unfair it was, trailed off partway through, because when you actually say them all in a row, forensic sketching and the 1,000 caddy crop and movable type and the exposed fraud and the recovered million and the saved hundreds of thousands, they stop sounding like unfairness and start sounding like a resume. Uncle Xiao Wen sat alone and let go, quietly, of a dream he'd never dared say aloud. Ninth Uncle Xiao Lei, the timid one, the one who, in the history I remembered, actually got the throne, saw with perfect clarity that the succession was over before it started, that a nephew had appeared from nowhere and taken the whole board. My father stood in the Eastern Palace holding the yellow scroll, stunned, bewildered, and, under it, prouder than he'd ever been of anything, while my mother beamed and rolled her eyes at his disbelief. And out in the fields, the farmers who dug up the Kirin fruit heard that the boy from the palace was now the heir apparent, and were not surprised at all. Of course, a reincarnated immortal. It was only natural. At the investiture banquet, the whole family gathered to congratulate me, in whatever mix of real affection and flattery and jealousy each of them could manage. Princess Lihua teased that she'd have to bow to me properly now. Zhao Min sulked in a corner, and I needled him one more time. Told him that even if one day I became emperor and he became a latrine cleaner, there'd be no real difference between us. We'd both just be serving the people. He nearly choked. And my grandfather walked in on all of it and preached family harmony at his sons, unity, blood over ambition, which everyone understood perfectly well was just him publicly putting his whole weight behind me. So here's where the year left me. I'd opened it as a boy who'd finally hit the transmigration jackpot and read the fine print that said he had 11 months to live. I closed it, crowned the next emperor of the Tang dynasty, with the deadliest man of the age calling me his successor, an empire's worth of goodwill, a business printing money, a body that could bend war bows, and a grandfather who, whatever the con had started as, I'd have driven that carriage up the mountain for, even if there'd been no chest at the top. But changing your fate doesn't erase your enemies, it sharpens them. Every brother I'd just leapfrogged is now a knife with a grudge and a lifetime to use it. Zhao Min humiliated and hateful. Zhao Wen resigned but not gone. Zhao Lei quietly recalculating. My grandfather is aging, and the throne he's promised me only stays mine as long as he lives to hand it over. And my father, my kind, foolish, half-crippled father, is still sitting in the Eastern Palace, still one bad decision away from the rebellion that was written to bury us both. I changed the ending. I didn't unwrite the trap. I just moved myself from inside it to standing right on top of it, holding a crown, with everyone watching. I've got a woman named Wu in my household who nearly stole this dynasty once already, a step I've humiliated, and a goguryeo I haven't met yet, a newspaper to build, a father to keep alive, and a grandfather I have to make live long enough to see me take the throne, which, given how the man treats sleep, is going to be its own campaign. But that's all part 2. For now, I got the chicken, I got the poem, I got the snow, and I got the crown. Not bad for a dead boy. Ask me again in 10 years how it turned out.